Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Jaya Radha Giridhari Radha Giridhari Radhe Jaya Radha Giridhari Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Astatara Sata Shishimachil A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Astatara Sata Shishimachil Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanand Hari Hari Bol Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishna Bhutale Shrimati Devarmata Swami Nitanam Pachaya Vividaksha Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Continuing reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 29, Explanation of Devotional Service, Text 19. Madharmano guner etai Parisam Shuddha Ashaya Purushasyanjasabhyeti Shuddhamatra gunam himam Madharmano guner etai Parisam Shuddha Ashaya Purushasyanjasabhyeti Shuddhamatra gunam himam Madharmano guner etai Parisam Shuddha Ashaya Purushasyanjasabhyeti Shuddhamatra gunam himam Madharmano guner etai Parisam Shuddha Ashaya Purushasyanjasabhyeti Shuddhamatra gunam himam Madharmano guner etai Parisam Shuddha Ashaya Purushasyanjasabhyeti Shuddhamatra gunam himam. Word for word. Mat Dharmana, of my devotee. Gunai, with the attributes. etai, these, paris-am-shuddha, completely purified, ashaya, consciousness, purushasya, of a person, anjasa, instantly, abhyeti, approaches, shruta, by hearing, matra, simply, gunam, quality, he, certainly, mam, me. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. When one is fully qualified with all these transcendental attributes, and his consciousness is thus completely purified, he is immediately attracted simply by hearing my name or hearing of my transcendental quality. Purport. In the beginning of this instruction, the Lord explained to his mother that madguna shruti matrena, simply by hearing of the name, quality, form, etc., of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is immediately attracted. A person becomes fully qualified with all transcendental qualities by following the rules and regulations as recommended in different scriptures. We have developed certain unnecessary qualities by material association, and by following the above process, we become free from that contamination. To develop transcendental qualities, as explained in the previous verse, one must become free from these contaminated qualities. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When I first read this text, I was instantly reminded of last Tuesday's class, which has very similar words. And then Srila Prabhupada quotes that in the purport, that actually in the beginning of this instruction, the Lord explained to his mother, Madguna Shruti Matrena. So in this text we have Shruti Matra Gunam Himam. But the verse that I spoke on last week was this verse, Madguna Shruti Matrena, that Srila Prabhupada quotes as the beginning of this instruction. So, as we described that text last week, and Srila Prabhupada says in the purport here, at the beginning of this instruction, it's explained, Kapila Dev is explaining to Devahuti that when one is spontaneously attracted to Krishna, then this hearing of the Lord's names, qualities, form, pastimes, it's all very natural, it's spontaneous. And then Srila Prabhupada explains here that by developing the attributes described in this instruction, then we come to that level, we come to that platform. So I just wanted to read a couple of these attributes that we've gone through just in the last week. So all the classes of the last week have been this instruction from Lord Kapila Dev to his mother Devahuti. Even just yesterday, the devotee should always try to hear about spiritual matters and should always utilize his time in chanting the holy name of the Lord. His behavior should be straightforward and simple, and although he is not envious but friendly to everyone, he should avoid the company of persons who are not spiritually advanced. So we have these wonderful attributes, these qualities of a devotee being described. That the devotee executes devotional service by giving all respect to the spiritual master and the acharyas. He should be compassionate. Good job. Okay. He should be compassionate to the poor, make friendship with the devotees. So all this last week we've been going through these attributes of a devotee. Good job. So we've been going through these attributes, these attributes that Lord Kapila Dev today says are transcendental. So all these transcendental attributes, when one becomes fully qualified in this way, compassionate, giving, assisting others, developing friendship with the devotees, being able to follow the rules and regulations, being straightforward, simple, all of these wonderful qualities that have been described over the past week, giving proper respect to the spiritual master, the acharyas, being able to follow instruction, all of these kind of attributes, when we have them, when we become decorated with those transcendental attributes, our consciousness becomes completely purified, and then we are immediately attracted. So that's how we get to this level of spontaneity that Lord Kapila Dev started this instruction with. So over the past week we've been hearing these instructions that will actually rise us up to the platform of being immediately and spontaneously attracted to the Lord. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, today's purport, Prabhupada, he emphasizes the importance of following the rules and regulations. So Srila Prabhupada says a person becomes fully qualified with all transcendental qualities by following rules and regulations, as recommended in different scriptures. And we follow the rules and regulations, why? So that we become free from our contamination, from the contaminated qualities that we've acquired in association with matter. And in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the second chapter, Divinity and Divine Service, we have very, very wonderful instructions, very important instructions, and one that I wanted to share today. We're going 1 to 15. So 1 to 15. With sword in hand, intelligent men cut through the binding knots of reactionary work, karma, by remembering the personality of Godhead. Therefore, who will not pay attention to his message? And Srila Prabhupada describes the situation, our situation, of being contaminated by matter really nicely in the purport here. So Prabhupada says, the contact of the spiritual spark with material elements creates a knot which must be cut if one wants to be liberated from the actions and reactions of fruitive work. Liberation means freedom from the cycle of reactionary work. This liberation automatically follows for one who constantly remembers the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead. This is because all the activities of the Supreme Lord, his Leela, are transcendental to the modes of material nature. They are all attractive spiritual activities, and therefore constant association with the spiritual activities of the Supreme Lord gradually spiritualizes the conditioned soul and ultimately severs the knot of material bondage. So because we've come into contact with matter, because us as pure spiritual beings have come into contact with matter, I love how it's explained here, that it creates a knot. We become bound up. When Sati is really good at tying knots now, and she tied so many knots the other day in the string of her pants that I actually had to cut it. I couldn't get it open. and this is what happens, in contact with matter, we develop these knots. They bind us to the material world, and that's why it's described here with sword in hand. With a sword to cut through the knots, intelligent men cut through these knots by remembering the personality of Godhead. How do we remember the personality of Godhead? We hear about him. We chant about him, yes? Shravana, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam. If we want to remember, we must hear and chant. This is how we get to being able to remember the Supreme Lord spontaneously. How we become just full up with thought of the Supreme Lord is through hearing and chanting. And that's our intelligence. Krishna gives us that process to develop our intelligence. So then with our sharpened intelligence, that sword, that weapon of intelligence, we cut through the binding knots that keep us hooked to this material world. Yeah, Srila Prabhupada continues in the purport to this second chapter verse that liberation from material bondage is a byproduct of devotional service. Attainment of spiritual knowledge is not sufficient to ensure liberation. Such knowledge must be overcoated with devotional service, so that ultimately the devotional service alone predominates. So it's not simply the attainment of spiritual knowledge, which is also very interesting, very intriguing, yes? Just spiritual knowledge is not enough. That spiritual knowledge must be imbued, it must be surrounded by, it must be realized by devotional service. There must be activity, there must be this absorption in action. We're acting to please the Lord by hearing, by chanting, by performing practical activities to please the Lord. Then that spiritual knowledge, it becomes, Prabhupada says, overcoated with devotional service. And then in that way, we attain liberation. Not that that's the devotee's goal, but it becomes a byproduct of our devotional service. We become freed from the influence of the material modes of nature when we're absorbed in devotional service. And speaking of the action of devotional service, in Nectar of Instruction, Srila Prabhupada, that's exactly how Srila Prabhupada describes Krishna consciousness, bhakti yoga. I'm flipping around different books. This is Nectar of Instruction, text 3. Because in this verse, in the purport today, Prabhupada's talking about how important it is that we follow rules and regulations. And Nectar of Instruction is such a concise, wonderful book where we get these regulations given and the understanding as to why we follow these regulations are given. So Srila Prabhupada, I'll read the text. This is text 3. Utsahan nischayadharya tat karma pravartanat sangha tyagat satovrite shadbir bhaktir prasiddhiti. That there are 6 principles favourable to the execution of pure devotional service. The first one, does anyone remember what it is? We'll do a test. 6 principles favourable to the execution of pure devotional service. Srila Rupa Goswami. Utsahan is the first one. Enthusiasm, being enthusiastic. Prabhupada gives a great definition of what it means to be enthusiastic in the purport. The second one is endeavouring with confidence. The third is being patient. The fourth is acting according to the regulative principles, such as Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, hearing, chanting and remembering Krishna. The fifth is abandoning the association of non-devotees, and the sixth is following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. And Srila Prabhupada translates this word prasiddhyati in the word for word. Prasiddhyati means advances or becomes successful. In the translation, Srila Prabhupada's sentence is these 6 principles undoubtedly assure the complete success of pure devotional service. And just if we take that one sentence, we can see the absolute importance of these 6 principles, 6 things that we need to develop, that we should be aspiring for, these 6 things. Because if we can follow them, then undoubtedly we're assured of complete success in pure devotional service. So as we've been, discussing in this section of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Kapila Dev, he's speaking of pure devotional service, and we know what a rarity that is. We know what an exalted goal that is. And yet Prabhupada says here that by following these 6 principles, please don't break then we're undoubtedly assured of complete success. So these principles are extremely important. And Prabhupada says in the purport that devotional service is not a matter of sentimental speculation or imaginative ecstasy. Its substance is practical activity. So devotional service is very practical. And, hang on. Okay, you right? And the purport is very wonderful here. And Srila Prabhupada speaks about many things. And it's really wonderful how Srila Prabhupada does this whole nectar of instruction, because we see in Srila Prabhupada's purports, he gives his purport, obviously very much based on parampara. He gives his purport, and he also gives Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj's explanation of the texts as well, which is very nice to read both of them together. What did I want to share here? So these 6 things. So it's being enthusiastic first. Where is Prabhupada say? Okay, Prabhupada says here that utsahan, enthusiasm, means endeavour executed with intelligence in Krishna consciousness. Is called enthusiasm. So, we want to be very keen, very enthusiastic. We want to use our intelligence. Prabhupada says it's endeavour executed with intelligence. So we need to use our intelligence nicely in Krishna consciousness, thinking of how to serve Krishna for Krishna's pleasure, and always being very eager for devotional service. And then Prabhupada says that these activities must be executed with patience. We have to have patience. And Prabhupada says here, he uses himself as an example, and of course we know he's the supreme example in this regard, in all regards actually. That Prabhupada says, this Krishna consciousness movement was started single-handedly, and in the beginning there was no response. And as we know from reading Prabhupada Lilamrita, you read, in the beginning Prabhupada went through so much difficulty. And if he was not patient, he would have jumped on the boat and gone back. He could have gone back. And when you read through, he went down. He kept going back to the port. When's the next ship going back? When's the next ship going back? But he never got on. He was determined. He was patient. He was enthusiastic. He kept going. Even though it was tremendously difficult, not knowing practically anybody, not having any resources, having to stay, where he was first staying with his Mayavadi yoga associate, and he had to stay there, and he wasn't allowed to speak. His associate, Dr. Mitra, he would have him chant kirtan, but he wouldn't let Swamiji speak to his students because Prabhupada was a personalist, and Dr. Mitra was an impersonalist, so there was always this thing. So when Srila Prabhupada was able to move out from there, actually it seemed like Dr. Mitra kind of, okay, that's enough, and Prabhupada stayed in like a cupboard. He didn't have any windows. It was this tiny little room. It didn't have a bathroom or a kitchen. He would walk to Dr. Mitra's apartment to cook and go to the bathroom and those things, but he had that tiny, tiny little room and his typewriter, and he started giving some classes from that tiny little room, and then it was broken into, and his typewriter was stolen. His only possessions were taken away. It was just, he had so many challenges Srila Prabhupada went through, and yet he was patient, and he uses himself here as an example of being patient. And when we, I was just thinking about this yesterday, how Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that we need to perform our duty equipoised, without thinking of loss or gain, victory or defeat. Yes, we just have to perform our duty. But that's difficult. that's like if you don't see any result, or if it's very it's very challenging just to perform your duty, then the tendency is to want to renounce the duty. Yeah, almost finished, sweetheart. You're doing really good. But no, we need to remember these qualities of patience and endeavouring with confidence, being confident that Krishna will give us what we need, that Krishna will, as Prabhupada says here, as the translation says, that will undoubtedly will be assured of complete success in pure devotion if we simply stick to these principles of being enthusiastic, being patient, endeavouring with confidence, following the regulative principles, which is the connection with today's verse, following the regulative principles of hearing and chanting, remembering Krishna, worshipping the deity, associating with the devotees. If we simply follow those principles and follow in the footsteps of the previous acharyas, associate properly with the devotees, then success is there. Success is there. Prabhupada wants us to be successful. He's helping us at every step to be successful. We simply have to follow the process. And that's where we can waver, because undoubtedly there are challenges in life. Undoubtedly there are challenges. But in the association of devotees we have great strength. We have access to great strength. And from these 6 qualities that we read in Nectar of Instruction, the next verse in the Nectar of Instruction is how to associate with the devotees, because that is key, really, for being able to constantly endeavour in Krishna consciousness. Without the association of devotees, it's not going to work. And associating with devotees in the proper way is very important. Because when we associate with devotees properly, then we are able to follow the regulative principles. We're able to do that. We're able to keep hearing and chanting and trying to remember Krishna and serving. But if we're associating with devotees in a way in which is not very favourable, is not very good, then we will also struggle in following the regulative principles and sticking to our vows. So, yeah, it's always these 2 key things, isn't it? Hearing and chanting about Krishna and associating with Krishna's devotees. If we're able to stick to those 2 processes and do them nicely, with intention, with enthusiasm, with confidence, with patience, if we're able to do those things, then we're on the correct path, we're on the safe path, back home, back to Godhead. And then we'll reach this goal, as Prabhupada says. We'll reach this goal of being immediately attracted. As the verse today, Lord Kapila says, when one is fully qualified with all these transcendental attributes. These transcendental attributes, Prabhupada says, comes from following the regulative principles of hearing and chanting, associating, serving Krishna. All of these attributes that we've been hearing about over the past week comes from that process of following the rules and regulations of bhakti. Then we'll become immediately attracted simply by hearing of Krishna's name or his qualities or his form. We'll become immediately attracted. It won't be an endeavour anymore. We won't have to drag our mind to Krishna. Our mind is just naturally absorbed in Krishna. Our heart is naturally absorbed in Krishna. So that's our goal. And this whole process of devotional service brings us to that goal, brings us very clearly to that goal. So I might leave it there and ask if anyone would like to make some comments or ask a question on this section.
Continuing on from that point, in the purple there, Prabhupada's quoted the Madhyalila, Nityasila Krishna Prem Sadhya Govinaya. Pure love for Krishna is a turning establishment. It's not something gained from another source.
it's very reassuring.
We don't have to go get it from somewhere else. We've already got it. It's just we've got to uncover it.
Yeah, we just have to access it.
Yeah.
And we have to sharpen that sword, cut the knots out,
cut the knots, yeah.
cut the knots, perform the surgery,
Yeah.
and then
amazing.
yes, yeah,
It waits.
and it's there.
Pretty cool.
Yes, it's very cool. Yes, very good point. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ganchar Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.